Check. Check. Okay. Oh, I know. Oh, oh.
Okay, if everybody's ready, my clock says 7 o'clock. We'll get started. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for everybody that came tonight. We appreciate it. We do have a presentation to start off with. We have our Harlan Row Ag FFA presentation. Whenever you guys are ready. You're on Zoom, YouTube right now.
Great.
No pressure.
I'm just here tonight to kind of show you what we've been doing in our ag program and how we've changed it a little bit this year to be an FFA chapter. And we are one of the first middle school FFA chapters in Pennsylvania, which is really exciting. So the Athens Middle School Ag Program has officially become its own FFA chapter. Our officer team was elected at the beginning of the school year. They had to apply and interview on a panel of judges, and they were selected based on their qualities and their leadership skills. The officer team got to travel to Harrisburg Farm Show for the Midwinter Convention and collect our charter on stage, and it was televised as well. And the requirements to be an FFA member here in the middle school is that you just have to be enrolled in the ag class. Then you're an automatic member. And I believe currently this year we have 130 members. Before I move on, I do have one of my FFA officers here. Go ahead.
I have attended the Midwinter Convention. I attended a leadership conference in Altoona and Bradford County. I went to, we judged plants and timber and the fish and water up at Mount Pisgah, and I've had a great time so far.
Awesome, thank you. So this is the layout of our current ag program. We offer 2 introduction to FFA classes, one for 7th grade and one for 8th grade, because I'm kind of front loaded in the beginning of the day with my special education duties, and then I do my agriculture duties in the afternoon. Last year, we just had a 7th grade curriculum that we did for 7th and 8th grade because 8th grade was moving on to the high school and 9th grade. So this year we specialized our 8th grade class a little more. So this is an elective course, so they have it every other day for half of the school year. So I only get to see them for about 45 days, which stinks because we want to do a lot of stuff. So the 7th grade is laid out in 5 different units. Each class starts with a what is FFA or what is ag unit. It's about 2 weeks long. So we talk about the history of FFA, why it's important, why it relates to our students. And that's for each course, even if they've had it the previous year, it's a great refresher. Our unit 2 is a plant science unit. Our unit 3 is based around animals and agriculture. Unit 4 is natural resources and environmental science. Unit 5 is leadership in the FFA. Then for our 8th grade this year, we wanted to make it more career-based. So this was our first year doing that. We had the same unit about FFA. Our unit 2 was ag career exploration. Our unit 3 was careers in forestry and natural resources. Our unit 4 was careers with domestic animals. And unit 5 is careers in fabrication and construction. So I'm gonna go into a little bit of detail about each unit, and I'm gonna have some pictures to show you of what we were doing in those units as well. So for 7th grade, our unit 1 was what is FFA and what is agriculture and how it relates to you. We had some awesome experiences. We just had the state FFA officers come and visit our class for the last 2 days. So they helped our students learn about FFA, the mission statement, our motto, and they had different leadership activities as well as teamwork and career success. Some other things that we do is I always take my students to on a tour to the high school. So we see the ag mechanics shops, we see their greenhouses, and we talk about different ag courses that are offered to them up there as well. So then they can see it, touch it, feel it, and see whether or not they'd like to continue on this experience once they get to the high school. We also talk about the history of FFA. So that's really important to see where we came from and where we are now and all the improvements we made with agriculture. I just want to point out, this is my farm back in the day. So our plant science unit is where we get our hands dirty, literally. It's really fun. We have a huge emphasis on aquaponics and hydroponics, which is growing fish with water, highly oxygenated water. Or I'm sorry, growing plants in highly oxygenated water. And then aquaponics is using fish as the nutrient base in the same type of system. So we have 2 hydroponic systems in my classroom. You can see them up there on the right-hand side. So the students are able to grow their own lettuce and eat that and take that home if they choose. They make miniature greenhouses. We have adopted a courtyard over by Mr. Haggerty's room where we've built raised bed gardens and we planted our own gardens and landscape there as well. Our unit 3 is the animals and agriculture, and this seems to be one of the most fun ones for students because who doesn't like the cute animals? So we start out with animal classification, very basic things. We do a poultry unit, a horse unit, a dairy unit, and a livestock unit for 7th grade. But because we have such a short amount of time, it's just kind of like a hit and go situation. But these are just some of the animals that we've had. The 7th grade hatches chicks. We usually bring in goats and other things. So here's some other pictures as well. I take the 7th grade to my dairy farm. We have a dairy unit. I also have guest speakers come in who run their own ag career business. So I had a farrier come in. He comes in actually every semester. He's great. He gives up 2 days of his work to come and talk to each of my classes. And I bring my horse to school and he shoes my horse out in the parking lot or wherever we'll be able to fit her. So the unit 4 is the natural resources and environmental science. This one's a little tricky because we have to schedule it when we're able to get outside because I want them to be in a wooded area. I want them to be able to see the environment and not just watch it from their desks. Some of these things include pelt and skull identification. There is a forestry unit specifically where we talk about forest management, different careers options in forestry. And in December, if some of you noticed, we had a Christmas swag sale. This year was our first one. Last year, we just made Christmas swags when we were talking about Christmas trees in our final units before Christmas. And when we made swags, people said, you should really try and sell those. And we did. And we made almost 300 Christmas swags and sold them this year for Christmas, all from local cut pine off my property. And the students did all the decorating and the putting together and trimming and all the things. So that one was great. We'll definitely do it again. The last unit is leadership. This is usually like a 3-day unit. It's something short, but it's great to touch on just before they leave to their next special so they can be a leader in their next opportunities that they're available in or wherever they'd like to be in life. The different things that we like to hit on is what's the difference between a leader and a boss. At this age, it's really easy to confuse the two. What leadership opportunities are available in the FFA for them, and teamwork makes the dream work. So we do some great activities with that. In the 8th grade, I'm not going to go over the FFA unit because we already did that. It's the same thing. Unit 2 is career exploration. I was worried about this activity being too boring for kids because they joined ag to do a lot of hands-on things. But I start the kids off by telling me what they want to do when they grow up. And a lot of the options are very basic or common careers. And then I have them take 2 different career surveys. And it actually gives them up to 50 careers that they would potentially be really good at based on their questionnaire. And a lot of kids have no clue what these careers are, which is awesome because they are able to click on the career. It takes them to a video. It tells them how much money they make, how much preparation they need for the career, what their hours are like, if they work weekends and things like that. So the kids are really able to find some. It's a little creepy. I had a lot of kids who got like embalmer, but in one class. So this kind of sets the tone for the rest of the course for 8th grade because it's all about ag careers. So they find different careers that they're interested in, and then I'm going to show them different ag careers that are very popular here locally. We also do a little interview section where students do interviews, do's and don'ts. And this can apply all throughout life, whether they're applying for a scholarship, a job, a part-time job, or they're just talking to people in general and trying to make themselves marketable. So they really enjoyed that. I didn't think they would, but they really enjoyed that. They have to interview each other in that class. But, and then they get to go on and we get to talk about other careers. So our unit 3 is careers in forestry and natural resources. So we talked a lot about parks and conservation, being a park ranger, being a game warden. We do a forestry unit specifically because the students got to compete in the Bradford County Forestry competition for FFA. So I had the only middle schoolers there. So we competed against Troy High School, Athens High School, Northeast High School, and Canton High School. And I had 3 students place in the top 10 for 3 categories, which was awesome. So, so we get outside. I've had a couple guest speakers come in. This was also the opportunity for kids to go to Green Career Day, where they got to mix and mingle with lots of middle schoolers from different areas of Bradford County. We did that at Sunfish Pond. Students got to learn about being a game warden, being a forester, being a florist, being in agriculture, being in energy. They got to pick different areas that they're interested in. The coolest part I thought was that they had tree climbers and they let the kids harness up and climb the trees. And I had a student that got all the way to the top. I made it halfway, so I was quite impressed. This is Mr. Delp up here in the center picture. He's an Athens FFA alumni. He graduated 2 years ahead of me, and he's a forester in Dewshore. And he came to visit my classes and talked about his career. They did tool identification and tree identification, and that really helped my students in the competition in the following week. So I think that's what gave us our edge. Our unit 4 was careers with domestic animals. Again, another class favorite. So we really hit on equine careers. So with horses, kids didn't realize there were so many jobs with horses, and they make quite a lot of money because they're specialized. We did a lot with livestock, and we did some with rabbits as well. We got to go to the livestock judging CDE, again, where we competed against the same high schools. And kids had a great time. They got to judge horses. They were able to judge pigs, steers, lambs, goats. I think that's it. But we had a great time. Something else I love to do is bring in animals from my farm because I have a lot of access to that. Something that was really cool for kids to be able to see all the way through is I have meat goats or boar goats. They're right there in the middle. And they were bred at the beginning of the school year. And I got to bring them in and we did a blood draw on them in the middle of my classroom. And we got to send that blood draw into the vet where we found out they were tested positive for pregnancy. And then I just had 2 baby goats born yesterday and I brought one to school today. So, so that was really cool. They got to see the entire process go through. I love to bring my animals to school. I love to show them how it applies to them in life as well. They have pets or they eat meat, or if they get their eggs from a certain place, it's important to know where it came from, how it's processed, and if it's a healthier option for you or not. The last unit in 8th grade, since I just switched semesters over, is careers in fabrication and construction, or like an intro to ag mechanics, if you will. We only had not even a week left by the time we got to this unit, so we had to like really squish it down. So we did a general power tool safety, and they were able to use cordless drills, table saws, and it's amazing how many kids have never interacted with equipment before. So it was really awesome to do. We made miniature raised bed gardens so kids could do square foot gardening at home if they wish. And that was the end of our semester. So I'd like to include a little bit of introduction, or at least to see careers in welding, since Volcraft is such a huge career option in this area as well. And I have some people willing to volunteer to come and do that for our kids also. So that's something that I would like to do and expand on. So I'm going to pace myself better this marking period so we can have more opportunities in that section. We just ran out of time last semester. So now that I've told you what I've been doing, I would absolutely love to expand this program if possible. And my plans to do that is I love the intro to ag class, but I want the students to have more opportunity here in that area as well. So some things that I would look to include if I was able to, and if time allowed me to, or if you allowed me to, is I would continue to having an introduction to agriculture class, an introduction to ag mechanics, so students can get in the shop. There's a lot of students that really love to work with their hands in that situations, a vet or animal science introduction course, and a wildlife and forestry course as well. My goal is to preview what they will get in the high school. So that way they can make the decision by the time they get to ninth grade, whether or not they would like to continue on that path or if it's something for them. Before last year, I believe the high school teaches 2 introduction to ag sections, and this year I think they taught 4. So that really expanded after my intro to ag program last year. So we're really building up our numbers, and it's very exciting. And my last slide, I promise. I do have social media available for our program, and I would love if you'd be able to follow along with it and be a part of it. I do have a Facebook page. It's the Athens Middle School Ag Program. We post all our updates there. I love to post videos of what we're doing in class. I love to post pictures of what we're doing in class. And I do have a ag teacher TikTok as well, where I post lots of videos of what we do in class, and it's really awesome. It's a quick way to reach a lot of people in a really fun way, and it relates to the kids also. And that's it. Thank you. And I did want to say this is my 4th year teaching in this district. I was hired out of college in here. And that was my goal, was I really wanted to teach in Athens, and I wanted to complete my whole teaching career here in Athens. So thank you for offering that to me and allowing me to do that. But I really want to say thank you for allowing me to expand my passion in agriculture. That's my true passion. And the fact that I can combine my 2 favorite things together is awesome. So thank you very much.
When did this program start?
Last
This
year was the first year.
Last year was the first year. And you did all that this year?
Yes. In one semester, half year, every other day.
I just want to say, I think you're a great asset to our
Thank you.
district.
And that's while doing special education as well? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you
That's
very
exactly
much.
what we need.
Thank you, Mrs. Bidlack. I think you made a great pitch.
A lot of good pitches tonight. Any other questions? Thank you very much. It was very good. Any other ones? Oops.
I would love to know, after we get through this year, how many kids go on to the high school, and, like, just because I love the fact that you are bridging between the 2 schools. And I would just love an update in like a year to sort of see, what progress has been made, especially with that bridge between 8th and 9th grade.
Absolutely. We even saw that on our first year when I first got into ag. So this year in the high school, they increased 2 extra introduction classes, 2 extra sections this year to the students that came up with interest. So I'm very excited to see how it grows as well. And even if students decide they don't want to move on, I'm very pleased that I was able to educate them in what feeds them and what clothes them. And
Yes.
very rewarding.
Noah, can I ask you a question? What grade are you in? What made you join FFA?
Everything about agriculture. I live on a farm. We raise beef, cows, chickens. We do some pigs sometimes too, and I like everything around the whole part of agriculture. I love it.
What's your favorite part of the class?
I don't have to take part, honestly. I like everything.
Everything?
Are you all as parents? Yes. What do you think of it?
I think it's great, especially at this level. I mean, I wish we'd had that when I was in school. We didn't. But it's great, and to see them introduced to that, and to know that, like you said, with the job market now, getting these kids into, they're begging for people out of school. And the agriculture side of the job market is exploding too, especially where knowing where your food comes from. It's a huge thing now. So it's important that they're getting introduced to it now.
I have a question for Noah. You survived the extensive interview to become an executive member of the FFA. Noah, one thing that I always love about the FFA is that while it is agricultural centric, there are so many life skills taught that are not anything to do with agriculture. What is one thing that you learned of being in the FFA just in the short period of time that has nothing to do with agriculture?
Probably communication with people. That was my biggest problem before. But after going on all these trips, especially with ag, I got to meet more people, be more comfortable around people. Yeah, that's probably what I learned.
What position do you hold on the team? Yeah, I knew that. I knew that. I just want to make sure everyone else knew. You're the president of the FFA. The one thing I am always impressed by is how you guys carry yourselves and the skills they teach you in terms of leadership and communication. And I can never memorize anything, but for you guys, memorization of the creed is something I always am so impressed by. So yeah, and Mrs. Bidlack, you do a wonderful job. And I know you split your time, but you do a great job at it. I am disappointed the goat's not here, though. I'm just gonna be honest with you.
We were promised a goat.
It's too late.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job, Noah. Thank you. All right. If there's no other questions, we'll keep moving on then. All right, up next, we do have the approval of the meeting minutes from Tuesday, January 25th and the Tuesday, February 11th work session. If there is no comment or discussion, we will approve these via unanimous consent. Okay. No discussion, they will be approved. Up next is our superintendent report. Mr. Stage.
That was my report. I can't do any better than that, so.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Barrett, solicitor's report. Welcome back.
Thank you. I was just telling the board member sitting next to me that I missed my third meeting in over 30 years. I apologize for that, but that was based on the change in the schedule, which we had to implement here a month ago.
Sorry.
I hope you didn't miss me too bad, but I hope you missed me some. We have several tax appeals which we're settling. 4 or 5 and come into litigation, and I got an email this afternoon. I think we've resolved one here in the borough, but I haven't got a chance to look at it yet, and I'll be making a recommendation to the administration in the near future on that. And I have one other matter which I've been working on for quite a while, and I will bring that up at the next work session and executive session. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Okay, up next is our visitor comments on board action items only. If you please give your name, address, organization which you represent, and subject matter. It is requested the comments be kept to 3 minutes. Comments relative to private student or employee matters should be directed to the superintendent outside of the meeting. When there's 1 minute left, I'll put one finger up so you know there's 1 minute left. And the microphone, I believe, is right to our left, the board's left, for anybody that'd like to do visitor comments.
Can I ask a question? Is the health and safety plan and board action item?
It is not. It's a discussion item right now. Yes.
So if I have a comment on the health and safety plan, is that in scope for right now?
Mr. Barrett? It's board action items of the items you vote on, correct, Mr. Barrett? Not discussion items? I think the next visitor comments is where that would come through.
Just on, we just be taking comments on what's on the agenda. If we have to
Correct.
modify the agenda, we may have to be open for the comment.
Is the health and safety plan actually on the agenda or is it? Like from the technical perspective?
I didn't see it. Does anybody else?
It's under discussion. It's not under action items.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. If there are no visitor comments, then we'll move forward to the financial business. Do I have a motion and a second to move forward with the financial business?
Mrs. Cooper moves.
I'll second.
Do we have any discussions on the financial business that's here? If not, we'll move forward to vote. Christine? Well, before we do that, just a reminder on there. This is also the proposed operations budget for the Blast IU. It is also general operations budget for the IU resolution. And Northern Tier Career Center preliminary budget resolution and preliminary budget. And obviously everything else that we normally have, cafeteria bills, activity funds. If there's no discussion, Christine, when you're ready.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
Mrs. Minnick, Mr. Owen,
Yes.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
Mrs. Smart,
Yes.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
and Mr. Chersnowski.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Up next, we have personnel. Do I have a motion and a second to bring this forward for discussion and vote?
Play smart. Motion.
I'll second.
Okay, on here, we do have some, I believe, some athletic volunteers that are on here, some athletic contract for track coach, and some retirements and some temporary positions as well. Any discussion on this? Okay. Christine, when you're ready then.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
Mrs. Minnick,
Yes.
Mr. Owen,
Yes.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
Mrs. Smart,
Yes.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
Mr. Chersnowski.
Yes.
And Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Okay, there are no contracts and agreements. Policies, is there a motion and a second to bring forth policies for discussion?
Lisa Braun makes a motion. Mrs. Cooper, second.
Okay, this is the first read and only read, I believe, for our organizational chart. Any discussion on this? Anybody find any mistakes? I had to say it.
Fingers crossed, though.
I didn't see any. All right, go ahead, Christine.
Mrs. Minnick. Mr. Owen,
Yes.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
Mrs. Smart,
Yes.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
Mr. Chersnowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
and Mr. Frisbee.
Yes.
On to curriculum and instruction, do I have a motion and second to bring forward for discussion the new courses that are described here?
Lisa Braun motion.
I'll second.
Okay, these are bold and capitalized because these are the new, we brought these forward last work session to be on the agenda. They are the Ag and Natural Resources course and Practical Mathematics. And Mr. Siscano is what brought this forward. Any discussion or questions?
So are these the ag classes that will be added because of the interest? No?
These are high school.
High school.
Yeah.
At the high school.
Yep.
But probably more, the more kids that are funded out.
Because they went from 2 classes to 4,
That was from the intro class.
intro. So what is this class?
This is a class that they identify at the high school as being a need.
For the NOCTI.
It's gonna be like an environmental.
So that part of what she's doing here, if they're interested, because wasn't she doing environmental here?
The prerequisite was intro.
A unit, okay.
So just for clarification, students that are in the Ag Ed program at completion, they take the NOCTI exam and they can get a NOCTI certification in agricultural education. What both instructors have noticed is that they have found that they could use this agricultural natural resource course to kind of bolster their ability to score proficiently on those. It's another area that they could work on. So they thought that this course would help fill that gap.
Will it still be the same 2 teachers or will we?
Yeah, it has to be.
Not adding any staff.
Yeah, it's not adding any step, but it has to be those 2 teachers.
When I looked over the document online, it seemed really light in the details. Will that be added? Or maybe I only got through the first page. It seemed like it was a very, very short brief.
So that was just the course description.
Okay.
That was written initially. They'll have a syllabus.
So they'll build that out if
Correct.
this is approved and then they would go from there. Okay, yeah, it just seemed very light and I was like reading it and wanted to make sure that I understood that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, when you're ready, Christine.
Mr. Owen,
Yes.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
Mrs. Smart,
Yes.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
Mr. Chersnowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
and Mrs. Minnick.
Yes.
Okay, do we have a motion and a second for transportation items to be brought up for discussion and vote?
Cooper moves.
Second, Natalie Smart.
Thank you. All right, this is some changes to our bus driving list and I believe some field trips, if I remember correctly. Yes, some field trips. Any discussion or questions about this? Okay, Christine.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
Mrs. Smart,
Yes.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
Mr. Charles-Nowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
Mrs. Minnick,
Yes.
and Mr. Owen.
Yes.
Okay, up next is our building and grounds items. Sunday facility use request. Do I have a motion and a second to bring this to the table?
Lisa Brown, make a motion.
Second. Thank you. Any discussion on this? I think the only update on here, the new requests are scouts, and I think that's retroactive because it already happened, and 8th grade travel basketball. Which I think also happened too as well. Yes, Mr. Rude.
I mean, this isn't a comment about these requests, but do we have to approve these every meeting, or can it just be a board
Information.
information only?
So if we wanted to, it is in policy that you guys have to approve any Sunday use of the facilities, but we certainly can amend the policy so that you guys don't have to. You can be notified of Sunday uses if that's the preference of the board. And that was actually something I was going to raise tonight as a question.
Do we have policy and committee look at that?
Yeah,
Bringing that up?
because, I mean, I know I've only been on the board a short time, but I don't remember one ever being not approved.
Not yet.
Interrupt. The rationale behind that is based on the support personnel contract of overtime is why that was done.
Okay.
That was done years ago, just so the
Makes
board's
sense.
aware of the additional cost. That's the only reason. So it's certainly within your discretion to do away with it if you wish to.
Okay.
Thank you. So we could have the policy committee bring that up and discuss that.
Consider it done.
Okay. Any other questions on building and grounds? Okay, Christine.
Mrs. Smart,
Yes.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
Mr. Charles-Nowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
Mrs. Minnick,
Yes.
Mr. Owen,
Yes.
and Mr. Rude.
Yes.
Have that button removed.
Michael.
Okay. No, I think it's my button here.
I think it's Mr. Owen.
All right. So we're on number 16 now. Is that where you want to?
We know, we are actually, after we are done with the board agenda items.
Okay. All right. So I'd like to make a motion then to consider an update to the health and safety plan, specifically to section 3E with regard to contact tracing and quarantine. So all the board members have a copy of, it should be within your printouts here, of my suggested updates. I'll just hit some of the high points. Basically, what I'm recommending is that we update the health safety plan to mainly remove contact tracing and all references in the plan that relate to or result from contact tracing. Certain aspects will stay in the plan, such as we'll be excluding students and staff who test positive or exhibit symptoms of COVID-19. We will still report positive cases to the PA Department of Ed and PA Department of Health as required, and all students in quarantine will have access to a learning loss teacher. A few other items that are recommended to be updated as well is the mask requirement after the 5-day quarantine be turned to a mask recommendation. And then for any students that are quarantining due to symptoms, not a positive test, would be free to return to school once they're symptom-free without medication for 24 hours. And that's basically a summary of the changes, but all the board members have it in front of you as well, if you have any questions.
So Mr. Barrett, I just want to make sure, because this is, so if Mr. Owen would like to bring this, we need a motion in a second, correct? And it would be on the agenda then, and then we'd have to vote on it as well, correct?
Based on modification to the sunshine law, which was done came
Yep.
into effect the end of last August. Being this is a non-emergency matter, I may be debatable, but I'm going to call it that. You can overrule me, I guess.
Okay.
But I would say that it would require a majority vote to amend the agenda to add this up. Then he could make his motion if that motion passes.
Yep.
And then you can dispose of it as any regular motion you want. You can postpone it to a later date, refer it to a committee, or vote on it, whichever you want to do.
So basically, the motion is to bring the health and safety plan up for the agenda.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
And then if it gets, if it's a majority, then we would vote on the adjustments that he just said.
So we would need that as a motion, and I assume you're
I'll make
making
the
that.
motion.
So we need a second.
Yes, it needs a second.
I'll second.
And now, is there discussion with that then too? You can discuss it as you, or do you have to vote on it immediately, Mr. Barrett? Like, can you discuss it going on to it, or?
I think you can discuss it. I never had that come up before, but I think it's a discussable motion, yes.
I think, okay. Is there any discussion, since we have a second, a motion and a second to bring up the health and safety plan?
I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear on this matter. I mean, I have.
That wouldn't come up until later, okay?
This
This
is-
is just to amend the agenda.
Chuck,
to
it's
talk
just to
about
bring it up
okay?
right now. But you, I understand what you're saying.
So we're basically just voting now as to whether it's going to be on the
To
agenda.
add it. to-
Correct. What-
Correct.
Whether we're going to
We're
talk
gonna-
about it or whether we aren't going to talk about it, right?
Then we wouldn't be deciding on what we're going to do with it after we talk about it.
No,
Like, until-
this
that
is
would be
just
part
a
of that
motion to
discussion.
talk.
Just
yes.
to add it on.
Add it on
the
the
agenda.
agenda as a change, or as a proposed change, yes. Proposed amendment, yes.
There's no discussion. Anybody else?
So we can discuss what's on here?
Right now, we can discuss whether or not we want to add it to the agenda, Lisa,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
yes.
One,
No,
if it's added
no,
to the
that's great.
agenda, then we would discuss
There, then I have.
the specifics to
until
what he's
later.
saying.
Yes.
All right, so we're voting, just to be clear, I like to be clear, we're voting on adding the health and safety plan to the agenda.
A yes vote would
yes.
add it, a no vote won't.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, when you're ready, Christine.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
Mr. Charles
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
Mrs. Minnick,
Yes.
Mr. Owen,
Yes.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
and Mrs. Smart.
Yes.
Okay, so it is now on the agenda.
So you need a motion on it?
So now Mr. Owen did state something, so you need a motion and a second then to amend the health and safety plan. Correct, Mr. Barrett?
Correct.
I'll make the motion.
I'll,
Okay, now there can be discussion on the actual amendments that he stated.
okay.
I think either prior or during the discussion, we should allow the visitors to comment on
So-
the agenda item, yeah.
So now that this is a a board action item, if there's any visitor comments on that same stipulations I just read a little while ago, I'm not going to read it again. Name. It's right over here, please.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Their chairs are like,
Oh, okay. Like I said, 3 minutes, please.
fair enough. Not till I get over here.
It starts as soon as you start talking.
All right. So last meeting, sorry, Matt Cooper, Athens, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Last meeting, I mentioned that we should address the health and safety plan until we're back to normal. And I recognize that it's not entirely woke these days to say normal, because what's normal? So I'd like to instead bring up a question to this board. And the question is excluding healthy students from school ethical? And my answer to that is it is not. And the reason specifically is excluding healthy students from school is effectively revoking a property right without due process and segregation. And that is set forth specifically in 1975 by the Gosview Lopez case, where the Supreme Court ruled that students have a, quote, legitimate entitlement to public education as a property right, and that right may not be taken away without first providing due process. So by excluding healthy children, and again, we're talking about healthy children, by excluding healthy children from school, you're not providing them adequate due process as is laid out by the Supreme Court ruling. Further, more historically, in Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, the Supreme Court said, quote, "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal." So in this case, by excluding healthy children from the classroom, you are forcing them into an inherently unequal learning environment. And that learning environment is their homes, where they're not able to educate themselves. And of course, parents are not prepared to educate them as well. So by excluding students that are healthy without due process, you're one, taking away their property rights, and two, you are segregating those students into an inherently unequal environment. And I want to talk about one more thing about the weight of the consequence. So we have shown over this last 2 years that regardless of our mitigations, we have not been able to control COVID-19. That's both in Bradford County, in Pennsylvania, United States, and across the world. So mitigations have not worked. However, over these past 2 years, we have exposed our students to propagandization of medicine, of science, to mask shaming. I actually talked to parents that are more worried about being mask shamed by their teachers than they are by the fellow students. And this has led to a mental health crisis. A mental health crisis that I'll add has been seen here in that we've gone from 2 mental health professionals to 5. Now, this mental health crisis that is looming upon us is going to last far longer than COVID-19 has. We need to act now to get back to normal, and that is remove all exclusions of healthy students from our classrooms. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Perfect time. Yes. Any other visitor comments on this board action item?
Just to add, my name is Deb Huber, Athens, Pennsylvania. Y'all know where I live. Just to add to what he had to say, I was at the meeting last week and I vetted information from Dr. Peter McCullough, who claims that the new data from a HAAS study, HAAS, is telling 5 to 11-year-olds with elevated troponin levels. This is very scary. So what I also found out that, and we all know that 97% of all PCR tests are false positives. Excluding these students, and again, the mental health issues that have been raised in this community are significant. So let's keep ourselves behind the 8 ball because you folks are doing an excellent job. I am working with a couple of other school boards and out of this area, and by far we are way ahead of the 8 ball. But please remember that these kids are going to be traumatized for the rest of their lives. And I really don't want to see that happen in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more visitor comments? Okay, so we can still discuss this. Is there any discussion on this?
Someone give me an example of the healthy students that we are excluding. Anyone?
Yeah, it's when you're quarantining. When you're quarantining a student that isn't positive, and they've been out. Right now, I don't know our number of quarantine, but at the last meeting, they had said we had 480 students quarantined. Now, I don't know the numbers on that, but I'll just give a personal reference. My son has a friend who last year, not this year, but last year was traced and quarantined 5 times, and it was at least 10 days. So that's 50 days of school she missed and was never positive and never symptomatic. Now, because of just the way the Department of Health made us do all of it, you know what I mean? Like it.
Is it okay for
Right now, it's board, the time for visitor comments was that time right there. So right now, it's discussion between board members. Yeah, I think he's looking out, but I think he's asking. Yeah, on the board. To the board.
To anybody, I want to make sure I make the right decision. okay?
Ask that question again, Chuck, and I'll try to
So,
answer.
an example of a healthy student that we are excluding.
So prior to January 25th, any close contacts of a COVID positive student would be quarantined for 10 days. After January 25th, we do not exclude any asymptomatic, which I would believe is a healthy student. We would only require them to wear a mask for those 10 days now. So the only situation that we are coming against where a quarantine is still required, possibly for healthy students, is when we find COVID in the home and they're a household close contact where they cannot isolate. Those would be the only situations where that's happening currently. But to Mr. Cooper's point, yes, it did happen last year and up until January 25th.
How are our numbers right now, Craig?
This week, I'm not going to knock on wood, but I should, but we've experienced no COVID cases and no quarantines at this point. As of like 1:45 when I checked the spreadsheet last. And last week was very minimal. I think we had at the max, I think we had 2 buildings with 1 COVID case with 1 quarantine. And I think we had 1 building with 6 cases of COVID and 3 quarantines. That was pretty much the total for the reportable week of last week. So just to give everybody a reference point.
So when we quarantine them, they may appear healthy, but we don't know if they're healthy because of the incubation periods.
Right.
So that was the reason for the quarantining.
Yeah, so in our observations, now remember, we're not scientists and we're not medical experts. So please take our information and do your own fact checking. But in our observations, the only time we really have a serious issue, we've had issues of incident of spread in school occasionally, but the prevalence of students catching COVID because someone in the home did is incredibly high. That for us is a given. We almost write them down as they're going to end up with COVID within the next 5 to 10 days, and they typically do. That's if they cannot isolate. And isolation means they stay away from the household member that does have COVID, and they don't share common spaces, kitchens, bathrooms, and living rooms. So that would be the only situation where we feel like there's probably still an issue for us to be on alert about.
Okay, you just referenced the home situation. So little Johnny's got a friend from the next town over.
Right.
That kid comes down with COVID. He's a close contact.
They typically, if they've spent time together, closer than 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes unmasked.
So outside the school, is that the contact tracing we're talking about right now?
No, we're talking about
Strictly
contact
in
tracing
school.
strictly in school for students and staff that are COVID positive. We still do identify who the close contacts are, but their exclusion of them, we've greatly reduced to only those that present symptoms.
Do we have any data that talks about for the in-school, the kids that were a close contact that actually came down with COVID?
Throughout this year, we've probably had maybe 10 to 15 instances total, or maybe, 10 to 15 instances over the last year and a half where that might have been a possibility. Now, remember, there's other outside activities going on where these kids also commingle, sports, activities, clubs, scouts, other types. I'm not saying any of those places were a result or a cause, but there's also other social gatherings outside. We saw an issue at Halloween because of trick-or-treating, but we were in the midst of a spike. And so if you've looked at the county and regional data, the numbers of COVID has dropped off dramatically in the last several weeks.
What if we do the opposite? What if we get rid of everything and wait for something to happen? Let's be reactive instead of proactive. Like,
So are you recommending no contact tracing?
no masks.
No masks?
Even if they're COVID positive, for the one for COVID positive, for the 5 days after being COVID positive.
I think, I mean, the language that was presented to us, I agree with. It's, COVID has been placed inside the Pennsylvania code for schools and early learning centers and so on and so forth. And that language has gone on to with communicable diseases in this code, which is what's placed. If they're symptomatic with a fever, have to be fever-free without medication. So this is, what our understanding is that this is addressing it in that manner, that if they have a fever, you must be excluded until you're fever-free with no medication.
Correct. So it's like if they had the chicken pox, they would stay out for however many
They
days.
have a certain amount of
Or
days
the
for
flu.
chicken pox. That's longer. I've read the
Right.
code, but yeah, and measles and, yeah, the flu's in there too, I think.
And if the numbers go back up, then we readjust it again and change it around again.
I'm more supportive of the asymptomatic piece of it than I am that doing that part of it. I just think if they're COVID positive, that we should be trying to mitigate that from happening any further. The asymptomatic
But that would be
piece.
part of the communicable
Yeah,
disease.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, though, but yeah, but that's,
Still has it in here, yeah.
okay,
But
I just want to
they
make sure.
say recommend
If
for
they're
a mask,
positive,
correct? Versus,
Is it recommend or is
So
it, because right now it's,
he has it in his addendum as a recommend, and I guess that would be my only hiccup with
Me
this
too.
would be, everything else I agree with,
Me
but I
too.
would still recommend because the CDC guidelines are still, if
Correct
you're
that way.
COVID positive, you want to return in any college setting, school setting is still, you come back on day 6, but you must wear a mask from day 6 to the rest of the 10-day quarantine, which I think is a small price for to return back to 5 more days of normalcy. And if we are wanting to stay consistent with the guidelines, the only thing I don't approve would be that recommended. I would still want that to be that they would have to. Do you-
that's what I was saying.
That's where I
Yes,
am.
That's what I was saying.
I agree with that also. If they're COVID positive, they should have to wear a mask when they come back. If we change that part of this addendum, then I would fully support it.
I agree. I would too.
Could we, I don't have.
Which would include
can I see the
asymptomatic
household contact?
and the contact tracing. We're agreed with that, right?
That's great.
Yep.
I'm fine with getting rid of contact tracing. The admin team can get back to what they
Yep.
were hired to do and put the contact tracing back on the Department of Health.
My one question, with those changes, and I'm the same way, I would support the changes, but keeping the mask required if they are COVID positive. But I guess I have a question. Do you anticipate any other, if we make these changes tonight, any other impacts on the admin or teaching staff? Or any concerns that might come up? Because again, this is sort of, and I know we went through this process of, how do we walk this on? How do we share this information? And so there hasn't really been, we've usually been very open and transparent in
Yeah.
allowing people to understand the changes we're making, to, discuss them publicly. Do you anticipate any pushback or problems in the schools if we made changes without that sort of open forum of discussion?
I think that's a good point to make. I think as we talk about students, it's absolutely, trying to keep kids in school, and I understand that, but we're also talking about, these will impact our staff and our administrative team. And our administrative team, we have discussed this at length, and we were prepared, knowing that I think the ultimate goal or the conversation was we're going to keep this on the agenda and we're going to transition to normal, and it's going to be over a period of time. So we keep talking about what we see and what we're comfortable with. I do ask the principals to communicate and get feedback from teachers. I will tell you, I was out and about after the last change we made, just checking in, and there's a large portion of our faculty still wearing masks. A significant portion of them are still wearing masks, so they still are probably feeling some sort of heightened sense of, awareness of their own health and the possibility of sharing that with loved ones. Will you see an all-out free-for-all? I don't know. I wouldn't be able to judge that very accurately. No one has been adamantly opposed to anything we're doing, but also sometimes people just don't speak up because they just go with the flow. You know what I mean? So best guess, you're always going to have some upset apples, but I don't know if the whole apple cart is going to turn over.
Yeah, totally understand. I'm just,
Yeah.
because this is all, I mean,
Yeah.
as with everything, we've been feeling our way here, but
Right. And
we have really tried to open it up for
The-
discussion and debate, so.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I do think the environment is changing. And I do think the trend is, and I appreciate some of the comments Mr. Cooper made about, I think in the beginning of the pandemic, it was about containment. And now it has to transition. And I'm borrowing someone that's not me. We're transitioning from the pandemic mindset to the endemic mindset, similar to what living with the flu. And while we're trying to do everything to keep people safe, but we also need to start weighing the risk versus the rewards of all these mitigation factors. And the risk is obviously mental health, unfinished learning. The reward is in person, being able to support our kids when we need to. There's no easier way for us to support our students holistically than having them in our facilities as much as possible.
Can I ask one further point of clarification for Mr. Owen? The paragraph that says students and staff who do not test positive for COVID-19 but exhibit symptoms, are you talking about those that have actually been tested for COVID or people who choose not to be tested for it but are exhibiting symptoms? Or
It
people
would
who have a
cover,
negative
it would
test?
cover both. Basically, what I was just referring to there is that we would go back to the PA code that says how to handle these diseases. So if they chose not to test or had a positive, or I'm sorry, a negative test, but still had symptoms that were in that code, they would stay out of school until those symptoms go away without medication for 24 hours. So in other words, they can be out for a day, 5 days, whatever it is, just as long as they don't have those symptoms to return.
But there's an option there that they could choose not to test. So they
Correct.
could be COVID positive, but they're choosing not to test and.
Correct.
so-
Yeah. No, there's no test requirement.
Yeah, no, it could.
Yep.
I'm just want.
That happens now.
Yep. Yeah. It's basically what it is now, right? There's no requirement to test now. Yep.
So I have a question. Professionally, I see these kids and parents are adamant about them not testing. I'm very suspicious it's COVID positive. I don't force anybody to get a test, but we are at a point like, I don't know if they're going to let you back in school if you don't test. You're having all these symptoms. On our standpoint, we get kind of in the middle of this, then they get mad at us and how dare you want to test? But I'm like, well, I'm not making you, but I also can't say you're clear to return back to school because I can't say you don't have COVID. So I don't know. There's this fine line. Like, it's really tough. Some parents
But as
get
long
mad
as they
at
have
us.
symptoms.
But that if they have symptoms, so if we just say, yeah, because a lot of them don't just say they don't have COVID, and I'm like, I
Right.
cannot.
And that's why it's important here that we're referencing the existing law that exists today, that
Mhm.
it clearly defines what the symptoms are, right? And again, this applies to whether it be COVID, the flu, right, whatever.
And this
If
is
these
where you just
symptoms-
gotta hope that the parents or the guardians just kind of do
The right thing.
smart, do the right thing, and
And the biggest component of the mental impact is the isolation, having to stay home? Or is it just this whole overwhelming thing?
Also falling behind educationally.
Because they're out of school.
Right. In especially things like lab sciences and math and things like that that are not easy to absorb for a lot of students, especially on their own.
and the student that says,
That was my fault, I think.
we do provide for anybody that is in quarantine, we are able to provide the access now
Right.
currently.
Learning
Do
loss.
we, I guess I'm asking. We do have are they
we doing?
still
Yeah.
able to have access?
You want to change that to quarantine/isolation?
Yeah, so we have a learning loss instructor
Someone-
that gets in touch with every student. They still have access to all the online materials. And then when they return, we do provide them of several opportunities to have tutoring after school to kind of stem some of the loss that they've had. But, honestly, that's the trouble we're facing is, I think, again, I don't want to reference Mr. Cooper or Mrs. Cooper, I think brought it up. There are students that, and we had a perfect example. We had a student in the elementary school this year, I think first or second grade, that didn't actually start school until the middle or end of September because they were identified as a close contact before school even started. And it just kept getting passed around in the home. So we just kept extending his quarantine. So there are those situations that do happen for sure.
We did also revise this, less than a month ago as well? And are you now saying though as well that you're seeing less of a burden when more kids are in school with the revisions we made?
Well, it's
Or
yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much we can.
No, that's a good question. It's a natural change. Yeah, more kids are staying in school. I think that's the gist of the whole changes that we made in January. I do like, and I did say last week, how's the impact on the administrative team? Well, some will tell you that they are seeing less work that they have to do, and some are still doing quite a bit of work because they still have to do a lot of contact tracing. The conversations now around contact tracing are changed. It's like, hey, your child's asymptomatic, just make sure they're going to have to wear a mask. Are you okay with that? Versus, hey, you need to come get your child. And then you have to dive into a 5 to 10 minute conversation as to why they have to come get their child. And, probably have a difficult conversation sometimes, not every time. Some people are very agreeable to that, but some people are not because they just don't want their kid out of school or repeatedly. I think the people that give us the most pushback are the parents that have had their kids quarantined multiple times.
Currently, or in the past, who's the gatekeeper on determining if a child has a symptom? Is it the school nurse, the school principal?
It starts with the teacher. If they see a kid that's sick, they usually then it goes to the nurse, and the nurse gives them a quick temperature check. And so she's usually the gatekeeper. I only say she because all of ours are she's, but
So the nurse is the
if they have
final
a
say.
fever, yeah, we typically try to send them home. Now, they do consult with the principal because it could be COVID related. So we usually trigger some other conversations, but yeah, usually but that's the same thing as if they had a fever because they had a cold or a flu.
So how long, this one's been in place for what, 2 weeks?
This current plan's been in place for 2 weeks.
The plan was approved on January 25th. So
About 3 weeks.
3 weeks, maybe, yeah.
Can I interrupt for just a couple housekeeping matters?
Sure, Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Owen, I just want to be clear that your proposal is to eliminate section 3E in its entirety and add what you prepared. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's proposed.
And Ms. Cooper, that was your understanding of your second.
That was correct.
And all board members are in agreement with that, and they understood what they want to do. They want to take out all of sections E, 3E, and substitute it with this.
So if you want to make an amendment to that, we'd have to vote on that and then
Yes.
make another amendment.
That's where I'm coming from, yeah. Now, I think Ms. Braun and Mr. Rude had suggested they wanted to eliminate the word number 5, recommended to required, I would suggest. You wanted to remove the word. So if you would make that as an amendment, we'll see where we go with that. It would be an amendment to this motion.
So Mr. Rude and Mr. Braun.
Yes, can we make an amendment to change the word recommended under E or letter E, number 5, from recommended to required?
Mr. Rude, you second that?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Can I just raise one other concern I have in general, and that is, I don't have the current health and safety plan. So like when we're talking about taking away, or
I do.
like if I'm not able to see them side by side, I can't say.
Take that, Natalie. Yep, I just made some marks on it. so- Go ahead. Craig has another copy if anybody else like it.
Yeah, if you need one. They're also, if you're.
It's online as well, I believe.
So this is the one. Right.
To required. So this would take out essentially also the household close contacts.
Right.
Natalie, or take home the household close contacts as well, take that
So
out
it's not anything other than.
on the
they
bottom.
amended the Pennsylvania law.
Well, what they've said is you just have to notify them, so they have notification.
Supposed to.
So this
And
is,
this is gonna be to amend
Oh, yeah,
this.
but they
yes, I think we have to amend this first,
This first, and then this for
Yeah, it
next.
because we don't want to approve this. I think we have to
Yeah,
amend
they-
it then
they
to approve it.
placed in there.
Or you can, this
How much
can be
room is
no's.
Since January.
This can,
When you bring it up now.
this can be no's across the board until we do
Yeah.
this, and then do that.
But it's your
We have to vote on the amendment first.
I know, John.
So we vote on this first.
Just changing the two letters, just changing the word.
If
So-
everybody approves that,
If they approve it, then it becomes the motion and we vote on the
and then we
motion
vote on the
And then,
original
and
with the amendment.
with the amendment. Vote
Okay.
on it as amended. If it's not approved, we vote on his original motion.
Got it, okay.
okay.
So I just, I want to make sure we know that the way that this is written,
That's what I want.
close contacts, including the home, are out,
Correct. Right, the way that proposal is written, correct.
are out, or so they.
So basically
they-
the way
So
that,
if my sister comes to school and there's a close, we're not masking her.
correct. Yep.
Isn't that where we're seeing most of our occurrences?
I have Mr. Moser here tonight. I don't require principals to come to board voting meetings at short sessions. Would you like to share, Mr. Moser?
Sure.
Or
So I
Mr.
would say, we talked about this as an admin team.
Corey.
Okay. So I think most of the amendments, I think we commend you guys on like the time you take and how you talk about it, and you're very transparent. And we've used all the decisions I think all of you have made are based on the data that we're seeing, right? We've talked about what we see in schools are close contacts ending up being sick or not sick. And we found that they're not. In the household though, we are. So like you guys have kind of walked this back very slowly, which I think is good because we know what the data is saying and what the science is saying, but then we also take into account people's perspectives and how like all of our employees feel throughout the district and what their comfort level is. So I think as you've rolled this back very slow, that provides a level of comfort because it lets them see what the changes actually result in as far as whether or not we have any kind of outbreak or spread in the schools. I mean, yes, nowhere else. I don't think anywhere else they're contact tracing. I think the biggest time consumption that we all have is that component, is the contact tracing. So getting rid of that does allow us, like you guys have mentioned, to go back to what we were hired to do. But we would say as a group, we talked about even our comfort across the board, which is the household contacts. So although we are fine with getting rid of the close contacts in school because Johnny sits next to Susie, there's no need to do that because right now that's the time consumption, right? We contact the teachers, we get the list, we have to call all those kids in, we figure out whether or not they're symptomatic. This proposal gets rid of that, which is huge, but in the house, we are seeing that. So I know our comfort level as a whole is that we still need to do the household. Like if you live in the same house, and that's a very simple process, right? Hey, Craig, you live in a house with Kathy Joe, your siblings, we should quarantine that in the household because we are seeing within 3 to 5 days that the household contacts are becoming positive. So I think that's still a mitigating factor to keeping it from spreading. Like that's still something we can do to stop the spread. Where if we don't do that in the household, those students are coming the following day, maybe, or maybe 2 days later, but they're not developing symptoms till day 3 to day 5. So I think we should still keep the household contact, which is an easy question. Hey, who's in your house? Who do you live with? They do the quarantine and that's it. Everyone
And that's
else
if
is
they
fine.
can't isolate, right?
If they can't isolate, yes, because if they do isolate and
If
we
they
have many
cannot
that can,
isolate.
I have, hey, Mr. Moser, we have a whole floor in the basement and they're down there, they have their own bathroom, yes, that would still remain. But if they can't do that, I think that,
Or if
right,
they have
Mr.
multiple
Toscano?
households, like if they lived with mom one time and there were dad, they wouldn't have to do that as well. If they
Right.
were- Yeah.
So
Right.
in the discussion with the administrative team, we were fortunate to talk about this, I think, last week. What we see is that the masks be required on returning positive cases and returning household contacts would be, for us, probably the next step down. And then, like you said, doing away with the close contacting and anything to deal with the asymptomatic students. That would be a kind of the step down that we were prepared to do if and when we were asked to make that suggestion.
So I'll say, I mean, if we want to make the update, do we want to vote on the update to add the word required and add that household contact back in? Can we do that all at once, or do we need to do?
According to what
both
Mr.
separate?
Barrett just told me, I think we have to make an amendment now to add the household, correct? Or
You can vote on that amendment.
because of what
Make
Mr. Owen
one
already
for
brought.
them, and then they can amend it again if they want
That's,
to add that.
and then we would vote on both amendments and then vote on the total plan itself. Yes, Mr. Owen. But one at a time to help Christine so she doesn't lose her mind.
Got it. Okay.
Oh.
Okay.
So right now we have the amendment for the required mask for 6 to 10 days. If a student is COVID positive or staff member is COVID positive, I believe. And then if there's any other amendments we'd like to make, they would be made now.
Amendment about the housing. Anyone from the house.
So the one that
household.
currently states,
Sorry.
it's the last, you're fine. It's the last bullet right now in our plan on page 6, household close contacts. Student staff who are living in a household with COVID-19 positive individual and cannot isolate from that individual will be required to quarantine for 5 days. On 6th day may return with mask for 6 to 10 days.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So just the rest of that whole bullet is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Halfway.
Okay.
Halfway.
So we have a motion.
Before we do that, can I
Okay.
just? I just want to check on that. It's in the current one, not in the newest one. Asymptomatic students or staff who are determined to be a close contact will not be excluded from school, but will be required to wear a mask for 10 days. Is that that's just any close contacts? That's not COVID positive, but asymptomatic. I just want to make sure I'm understanding that. And I'm sorry, it's so confusing. but-
So in my proposal, that basically would go away because any close contacts, any results from close contact or from contact tracing would go away. So that bullet would go away because there would no longer be any contact tracing.
Relate to asymptomatic COVID positive.
Correct. If COVID positive would fall into the
Okay,
first bullet.
I just wanted to check on that. I just
Correct.
wanted to make sure. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
And if they, Natalie, if they get a fever or become symptomatic, then you need to
And this one's the other bullet.
be away until you're not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. But this one's the other one, right? This is the eight.
This one's his.
We're gonna do a dance.
We have the word recommended in there now.
Yeah, okay, yeah, then I have that, a required mask, okay, so we still have two, so we need a second.
So we still have a motion for keeping household close contacts. We do not have a second yet.
I'll second it.
Mr. Rude seconds. All right, so just to be crystal clear, we have 2 amendments that we have to vote on. Amendment number 1, which is the required mask for a positive student or staff member for days 6 through 10. And then amendment number 2 would be the household close contact piece. If they are both approved, then we would vote either way, I guess, according to Mr. Barrett, we would then vote on the amended proposal that Mr. Owen has just brought that was motion as well. Good synopsis. Okay.
Vote on the 2 amendments.
Yep.
And then a vote on the amendment.
All right, so what we'll do first, we'll vote on the first amendment. If, Amendment 1, which Christine's going to take right now, is the required masking for positive students and staff for days 6 through 10. Christine, when you're ready.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
Mr. Charles-Nowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
No.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
Mrs. Minnick,
Yes.
Mr. Owen,
No.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
Mrs. Smart.
Yes.
Is that all?
That's it.
Okay, that's it. So that one did pass for the amendment, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so now we're on amendment number 2, which is the household close contacts. When you're ready, Christine.
Mr. Charles-Nowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
No.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
Mrs. Minnick,
Yes.
Mr. Owen,
Yes.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
Mrs. Smart,
Yes.
and Mrs. Braun.
Yes.
And I'm correct that that one passed as well. So now with the amendments, we go back to Mr. Owen's original proposal with the two amendments passing. Go ahead, Christine, when you're ready.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yes.
Mrs. Minnick,
Yes.
Mr. Owen,
Yes.
Mr. Rude,
Yes.
Mrs. Smart,
Yes.
Mrs. Braun,
Yes.
and Mr. Charles-Nelson.
Yes.
So just to recap.
Yes.
make sure everybody's on the same page. We've approved what Mr. Owen put forth, except paragraph 5, and we've changed the word recommended to required, and we have re-added that last paragraph in 6 on household close contact.
Correct.
Yes.
Everybody agree?
Yep.
Yeah, that's what we did. Yep.
And Mr. Stage will put that updated health and safety plan out tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna use my decoder ring, but I got it.
Christine took good notes. Now, thank you, everyone. Thank you for a great discussion. So now we are at the visitor comment part where it is not on board action items. Please give your name, address, organization which you represent. Subject matter is requested that comments be kept to 3 minutes. Comments relative to private student or employee matters should be directed to the superintendent. When there's 1 minute left, I will put my finger up for 1 minute left. Are there any visitor comments? Okay, thank you. Board communications are the same communications, except the bold one is the Nutrition Inc. newsletter for January. We did have the personnel transfers as well. We discussed the health and safety plan and worked on it. I do want to say one thing before we move on to plan the future. I want to say thank you to all the administration for allowing our 5th graders to go on the ski trip today. I think it's a great thing they got to go on that. I've heard great comments. The kids are tired. They had a great time. What I do ask is the rest, if we could start bringing back some of that stuff that we've lost the last 2 years. Camp Relay would be one of them. Different things like that we could bring back.
We are planning that. So you guys approved 2 field trips that are
Yep.
going to replace Camp Relay.
Okay.
There's some, but it's going to be an experience similar, but it's not overnight. Okay.
Camp Relay was 6th grade.
Yeah,
It is.
Yeah.
But I'm saying bring back
But
those.
didn't we approve 7th grade?
you approved a 6th grade,
Yes.
2 6th grade field trips.
Oh, so
That-
they're not doing relay.
they're not
They're
doing
not
it.
open though, right?
No, they're not. I'm just
All right.
asking just to bring back.
They might
Where are
not.
the other grades going?
I want
Um,
to, sort of also, oh,
Oh, sorry. I think 8th grade is going to do a similar trip to last year. And I think
They went to Gettysburg.
they went to Gettysburg, and I don't know about 7th grade yet, but I'm sure they'll plan something.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's all I had for that.
I
Yes,
just
go ahead.
want to, further thank also all the work that the PTG did to raise funds for that trip.
Absolutely.
The parents, the students, who really worked hard to do that. I know my son went on it today and it was fantastic. And it makes me really happy that everyone came together. And thank you again so much to the staff and administration as well, who helped make this happen today.
Absolutely.
I think Mr. Williams, the phys ed teacher at Lynch, has made this a tradition.
When does SRU go?
They went last
They
week.
went last
Oh,
week?
I didn't know they went last week. Okay.
Yeah, they went last week.
I'm glad they went too. That's good to hear. That's great to hear. Future meetings, we do meet Tuesday, March 8th for our work session. It is at the district office at 7 o'clock, and our voting meeting will be at Lynch Buston on Tuesday, March 15th at 7 o'clock in the elementary school cafeteria. If there is, I believe, no need for executive session. Is there any other comments before we adjourn?
I have one comment for SRU. I don't know if you guys saw the post, but they celebrated the 100th day of school. And what they did out there was just amazing for those kids. The way the teachers came together, they had the 3 teachers dressed up as 100-year-old. They were dancing and just the activities that they did. I think Mr. Boyce and his staff are doing an excellent job out there. The kids looked like they were really having some fun.
I saw similar with the Lynch with my son there. So yeah, I think it's great. If there's no other discussion, meeting is adjourned. Thank you for all the coming. Thank you. Appreciate it.